I'm John Schnur. I know many people here, not everyone. I'm executive chair of America Achieves. And we are so fortunate to have Jim Shelton with us to close this day. I want to say a couple words about Jim, but before I do, I also just want to say it takes an entrepreneur often to create and support a community of entrepreneurs coming together across sectors in order to take on any issue. And I think as we're seeing the expansion of a community of people devoted to evidence-based policymaking, development works, I just think we all feel it. But I want to say a huge thank you to Michelle Jolin for your leadership in bringing all of us together. It's at America Achieves. We're an umbrella for a set of initiatives run by entrepreneurial leaders devoted to inspiring the country to raise the bar and focus on what works. And Michelle is just, leading just an amazing initiative that is sort of helping people learn so much from the work you're doing. Jim Shelton, everyone knows of Jim, but I just have to say a few words as having known Jim for a while. Jim has been a social entrepreneur. He has been in the philanthropy. He's now been in government. He has led the creation of a couple of the most important evidence-based programs and what works programs that we've seen, both the I3 program and more recently My Brother's Keepers program. When announcements got made from administrations, they were all about creating new programs in many cases. And to this epitomizes, this was actually creating a new evidence-based programs to fund what works, to analyze what's working across government programs. It was sort of everything that this conference is about. Jim helped the administration bring together across sectors an approach which is really testing out not only an approach towards solving this particular issue, crucial issue, helping boys and young men of color succeed and be on track to success in school, but he's doing what all of us are doing in various ways, is creating a little microcosm of what government could be in the future. And if Jim is successful in this, and if all of you are successful in this, when we look back 20 years from now, we're going to say, wow, this actually at stake was whether we as a country believe that government can actually play an effective role in addressing big social problems. And so that as we look at on the next issues of our time, whether we've been effective in this and people have the confidence, the public has the confidence that we actually can be effective, will wind up determining, I think, the long-term trajectory of our country. And the devil is in the detail. It's the specifics that matter to make this work, and nobody has a better command of the vision and the detail on this than Jim Shelton. So Jim, thanks for joining us and welcome.
Howdy, everybody. You guys have been in here for a minute. All right, so I won't keep this long. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. I have to take care of a little bit of business before I get going. Is that all right? Okay. You need me to speak up, or you give me the thumbs up? Okay, my bad. Okay. So you guys know me, I3. Lots of stuff that you talk about. One of the things that is actually extraordinarily critical for people to understand is that nothing ever happens that, especially that I'm affiliated with, where there's not like incredibly talented, competent people there who actually do most of the work. In this particular case, there's somebody who was instrumental in all this work who's here in the room. Most recently just kind of passing the mic around the room because she will do anything to make things work. And so I just want to acknowledge Shiva Malik Shah for the role that she has played in creating this entire context and the role she continues to play with RFA. But also, thank you. And just to make it extra embarrassing, today is also her birthday. So I know this is really corny, yes, but I would really, really like to sing happy birthday. Can we do it? Yes. Okay. I'll even lead off, which is really bad news for everybody. Okay. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Shivam. Happy birthday to you. Thank you. No, you guys are good. This evidence crowd. So that was, thank you very much. Thank you, Shivam. Thanks to everybody. So here's the deal. This work is now entering a critical phase. You all, by evidence of being in this room, recognize the opportunity and the moment that we have, but most of you have been around this long enough to know that moments like this can pass really quickly, where you were almost there, and then we didn't quite get there. So I want to talk about what I think it's going to take for us to get to the next phase of the work. Feel free to disagree, but let's put another hypothesis on the table, because the amount of time that at least this administration has to try and drive some of this stuff home is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And I am excited about the opportunity for an initiative that's as important to the president as My Brother's Keeper to be a model for how to think about this work. But the reality is that it too is not a place that ought to bear the burden of carrying this movement. So here's how I think about it. And again, I'm happy to fight about it. The way I think about what we're trying to do is to create a market for evidence. A market in which people want to spend money on folks who have evidence, and where the rational choice is for people who are in the business of providing, especially social services, think it is in their best interest to invest in producing evidence that they work. Like, it's just that simple. The reality is that if we could do anything, we wouldn't actually spend a ton of money paying for the evidence. We'd be paying for outcomes. But because it's so hard to pay just for outcomes, the next best thing is to pay for the probability of outcomes, and that's where evidence comes in. So getting that continuum right of saying, well, if we can, we're going to pay for outcomes. Where we can't, we're going to pay for the probability of outcomes. And then anything along the way has to be demonstrating that it's got a pathway to getting to that part of the market, that part of the sweet part of the market where most of the funding is available. That's the continuum we have to build. Now, I am a huge fan of the programs that we've created. I3, I think, is a fantastic model of what could be. The problem with it is it's tiny. It is tiny relative to the rest of government spending. There is no player out there that has to respond to that unless they are already so inclined, because there are so many other ways to get access to capital. In fact, what we're seeing is that we still have a large number of applicants, but because the probability of getting funded is so low, we've got a declining number of applicants applying to the program. So then what do we do? And the answer is actually pretty straightforward. We have to get other people in this business with us. We have to get states in this business with us. We have to get cities in this business with us. And we have to get comfortable with the idea that progressively the things that we hold dear, the things that are most politically difficult to touch, our formula funds, have to begin to make the migration towards rewarding people who have evidence that they work. There are two ways that that can happen. One way is the hard way, I think, which is that legislation actually causes that to happen. The other way is the long way, which is that we get inside people's heads and get them to start making different kinds of decisions using the dollars that they get from us to get buy the things that work. So let's break those two things down, starting with changing people's minds. The reality is that you just heard from this last panel that what we need are people who are thinking about this differently, that they can see that there will be an immediate payoff that they can benefit from the outcome, benefit from the credibility that they get as individual leaders, benefit from the cost savings that comes from it from their city, but that they have a reason to believe that when they put in this new solution, that's what's going to happen. Good things are going to accrue to them. Good things are going to accrue to their constituents. The only way I believe that we can get there from here, I think it's really important that we have a sampling of programs that work in individual problems, but we have to get many more places that are in this business at the site level where we can create proof points that they have actually bent both the performance curve and the cost curves in the right directions. Like, that is what has to happen. Now, what makes it nice is that in order for us to do the next thing that I'm going to talk about, we have to have that infrastructure in place anyway. Because what we really need is, why do our Wetworks clearinghouses only get traffic in the hundreds or thousands a month? Because there's not enough there. They're fragmented. They're in different agencies, kind of hard to find for people who don't know what they're looking for. And when you go inside and you're looking for things that work, the number of things, especially that have anything that looks like needle moving change, is relatively small. The only way we overcome that challenge is to dramatically increase the volume and the velocity at which we're actually figuring out what works and what doesn't. So stay with me. We have to shift funding streams, continue to build on the competitive programs, but also get dollars that people are using in other ways, especially formula dollars, to create incentives around it. We have to get people to recognize that there are incentives to them, real incentives, in terms of outcomes, in terms of results, in terms of savings, to actually making the shift. And we have to give them things that they can bet on that address the many problems that they face, and give them enough options that, in fact, they can walk through the gauntlet of getting anything implemented with something that is going to feel good enough to their community. So, those are the three big things. Tactically, what does that mean? What it means is that testbed sites, people keep bringing up the medical example. The reality is we have a more complex problem to solve. That said, we can learn lots of it from their examples. Testbed sites that are highly instrumented, that have data that they collect over a long period of time, so we can see what works, what doesn't, where there are implications that we're anticipating and where there were implications that we weren't anticipating. Where given the opportunity, we can go back and actually use the data itself to run experiments that we actually didn't think through at the time. That kind of data architecture and infrastructure and people who know how to use it needs to be in place. Not in one or two places, but I would say in dozens of places. We have funding to fund that kind of work, we just don't direct it that way. We have foundations who invest a lot of money in doing lots of things and lots of really expensive evaluations, but no one is investing in that kind of infrastructure that has staying power to support the kind of work that we're talking about. We have companies out there that say that they are building smart cities, and yet building that infrastructure, that it creates a self-sustaining capability to figure out what works and what doesn't and do the kind of continuous improvement work that we've talked about today, does not exist. Or if it exists in small slices of government. So investing in creating those kind of testbed sites has to be is a critical path step to getting the kind of infrastructure in place that we need to propel this movement. The second thing is, once you've got that, someone said something else really important on the stage, which is the incentive for people to be evaluated has to be there. Now, part of that we've talked about, which is the incentive that if you have evidence, you're going to get rewarded. The other thing we have to spend time thinking about is, if you produce evidence that is not conclusive, how do we ensure that you are not punished? Right? Because it is much easier right now to stand on the outside and watch and sell than it is to step into the fray with the risk that you're going to get evaluated and it not turn out right. And frankly, the only person who pays in that is the person who was silly enough to stand up. Because there's always somebody to sell something else that doesn't have that counterpoint. So if we don't address that context and create a culture where people can do that work, we will fail. The market will work against us. So last thing, we've got these testbed sites. We've got dollars that people are now trained to use because they have this infrastructure to both start implementing things that have an evidence base and testing things that they're doing on a regular basis, so we start to build the volume much more quickly. Let me say one more thing about this. We have a huge chicken and egg problem. And the chicken and egg problem that we have is, right now, all we can do is afford to reward the people who we actually thought enough of to invest in their evaluations before. Like that is a huge market problem, right? That I can't sustain the scale up category of I3 because there's just not enough stuff there. So we've got to create the market of folks, and it's coming, but too slowly, that are in that category. And they have to be good enough that when they do what they do, it actually changes people's lives. Having something that is that rigorously evaluated, that doesn't make a meaningful change, but makes a positive change, is not very helpful. So, are you guys with me? Okay. All right. So last thing then. How do we get leaders in the field? And I'm talking about all kinds. So lots of us think about like the mayors or the governors. Turns out in a lot of cases, there are actually some really nerdy people in budget offices who are doing lots of work without the benefit of any support, who make lots of decisions on a daily basis. The way I reconcile it in my thinking is that the joke I tell is, no one told me when I came into government that OMB was actually spelled G-O-D. And those of you who laugh loudest know exactly what I'm talking about. And that is true throughout government, that there are these people, and they control the dollar flows. They set policy even though they're not elected. And they have a huge determining factor on how resources get spent. We keep having gatherings with lots of people on the outside. Then we want to get in front of the governors. Then we want to get in front of the mayors. Problem with those guys is their attention span. Like building long-term infrastructure, roads, good stuff. People like that. Evaluation infrastructure, not so much. So we have to find those folks, find the few folks who are able to give them the air cover on the political level, to give them the tools they need to do this work, make them prove the case, identify local civic actors in many of the same ways we've done with promised neighborhoods and other things like that, where you say you're interested, prove it. Come to the table with your resources, with the people who you say have capacity and expertise to help you execute this work, and show us that you are ready to take this on. And when you show us that you're ready to take this on, we will help you with a bunch of resources, both public and private. But your promise to us is that you're going to be disciplined about this approach. And you're going to pay it forward back to the field. That everything you create, all the knowledge you build, you're going to get back to the field so that we learn more quickly together. You're going to participate in these communities of practice when you're dealing with these specific problems. And you're going to show us the pathway to sustainability so that after we invest, you are able to sustain this work on your own. So we can move on to other places that need our help to get going. Like, that's a promise we can make. There's enough philanthropic dollars getting spent. There's enough government dollars being spent. Frankly, there's enough of each being wasted that we could take some of that and waste it and put it there. And if we do it in the next 3 years, we can have an infrastructure in place that starts to make it such that if decision makers never figure out exactly how to agree with each other, at least things that work can still get funded. That's not a high bar. That's a relatively low bar. It's not super sexy. It's not any of those things. But what it is the way forward. Testbed sites, dollars to support them, attached to both long-term government employees as well as political leaders who are willing to carve out the way. Real incentives, both on the private side and the public side, to have evidence of what works. And starting to do the hard-ending political work of having that not only in the small competitive programs, but in the programs where the dollars flow in the billions. Just that easy. So you all have heard from lots of people smarter than me today. The thing that I will end on is that this is now not a question of like strategy. This is a question of will. It really is. We know what we need to know to get started. We have the kinds of systems available to us to get going. We have people already investing resources, including us. We have waivers that give us flexibility to take advantage of it when people do it. Mobilization, activation, sustainability. That's what's required. So if we end today having heard all this great talk and go out of the room and each write nice papers about what we heard, or plan our next evaluation for our individual program, we'll be back here 3 years from now. Maybe a slightly bigger room with more people more excited about what they're going to write about when they leave. But we won't have changed the field. And we won't have changed people's lives. So let's get about it. That's it. Oh, sure.
One or two questions?
Any questions?
Any questions? Or we're just going to go do it. All right, good. Thank you, Jim, for leading us, and happy birthday, too. Thank you, Jim. That was fabulous. Really, really amazing. Amazing, amazing. So let's just go do it. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for taking part in this. Shiva and I will both be back to you on lots of next steps and plans for what we're going to be doing. But thank you all for taking part in this. We really appreciate your participation.